Good morning, my GCF ICS family. As we continue celebrating Bible Week this week, I want to be able to have this time right now to teach you some of the skills that you can use to be able to study the Bible more and know the Bible on a much deeper level. Remember, when we read God's Word, we read to understand, we read to share, and we read to change. As a Christian, we are not a Christian by ourselves. We are a Christian in community. We are a Christian with friends and family and other people that we can share God's Word with, that we can talk to about God's Word. We don't just keep it to ourselves, but we share it with them. We ask them what we think, what they think, so that they can help us to understand it more also. But what we do is we make sure that as we study God's Word, we always stay deeply rooted on God's Word. So doing this, we're looking at Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to 32. Let's take this time to listen to it right now. Alright, so that was Street Lights. They are actually available on Spotify and YouTube and their actual website. They're an audio Bible and they provide so much of the Bible for free for you to listen to if you want to do audio Bible rather than read it. But right now what I want to share with you is that when we want to read the Bible to understand, to share, to change, we have to remember that reading the Bible helps when you know the passage. Do you really know the passage that you are reading? Yes, you might say, I already know the Prodigal Son, but if you read it, it's worth rereading it and rereading it. Read the passage many times, but take your time to open up again to that passage and read it. Now, something that makes it exciting and a little more interesting is when you read that Bible passage in multiple different translations. The Bible has been translated to English many times for many different reasons. Now, lots of different translations now are available free for all of us to access. You can use a Bible app. YouVersion is a Bible app I really like using. YouVersion is free, and you can access all the different translations of the Bible, even Tagalog versions, even in Korean. You can read all the different translations of the Bible there on YouVersion. When you open up the app and you go to the Bible passage, you can select what translation you want to read from. And also another Bible app you can use is the BibleGateway app. Same thing, you can look up the different translations over there in the Bible app itself. You just look up the Bible passage and you click the translation and it'll change it depending there. That way you're not stuck reading just one translation, but you have access to all the different translations. You can also access these online using a browser to go to Bible Gateway to be able to access all these different translations. I really hope you utilize this so that you can understand the Bible in a much deeper way. You remember that each of these translations have groups and groups of scholars who know the languages very well, who know the original Greek or Hebrew and know English very well, or if you're reading in Korean or Tagalog or any other translation you want, they translate straight from the original Greek into that other language. So that way there's no middle ground. They actually go straight from the original language to the language you are reading. What's great there is that you know that they are really trying to capture the essence of the words from the original to the language that you are reading it in. Now, I know a lot of us don't read Greek, so that's the reason why reading the Bible in many translations really helps. When you read the Bible in different translations, it gives you a much bigger picture because you see how many different scholars tried their best to interpret that original Greek word into English. Now, many times the translations will be exactly the same, and you'd be like, okay, they're exactly the same. But there are other times where there's something that'll be a little different and it'll help you to understand it better. For example, there's one part in the Bible where Jesus' friend Lazarus has died. This is where the famous verse, Jesus wept, comes in. And a lot of us know that Jesus wept. And if you look up Jesus wept in many different translations, they all are Jesus wept, which gives you confidence knowing that that is the only way to translate that verse, that Jesus really wept. Now there's another verse there in that section where it says Jesus sees the crowds and they're all crying and then Jesus wept, right? But there's another part where it says Jesus was deeply moved. When we hear deeply moved, many times we hear deeply moved and we think, oh, that means Jesus was sad. He can really feel the pain from deep, deep down in him. That's why Jesus was deeply moved. right? We say that Jesus is deeply moved. But then if we look at the other translation that said Jesus was indignant, and it says Jesus was deeply moved. But the other translation says Jesus is indignant. So now when we hear that and we read it in different translations, we see that when Jesus is there, ready to go to Lazarus' tomb, before he weeps and after he weeps, it says Jesus was indignant. He is deeply moved and indignant, which means Jesus is like, I'm ready for battle, let's do this. It changes the image in your mind, because oftentimes there's some words that are translated which carry its own baggage for us. But when we read the translation in different forms, it helps us to have a much rounder picture and make sure that we ourselves are not forcing our own images into a passage that's not actually intended by the original author. So what you do is you have to remember to know the passage. Know the passage, and the way you know the passage is by reading it and rereading it and reading it in many different translations. For me personally, I like to read it in 5 to 7 different translations. I usually read in the NASB, the New American Standard, the NET, the New English Translation, then the LEB, the Lexham English Bible, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, NIV, New Living Translation, and the Tagalog Bible. Like, which Tagalog Bible? There are several. Usually I read the Ang Salita ng Diyos. It's a more modern day translation into Tagalog. It's not the slang version, but it's more, at least it's closer to the Tagalog we use today. It's not so King James Tagalog. It's more contemporary Tagalog. And that way, when I read it, especially even in the Tagalog translation, it causes me to pause and reflect and process. Reading these different translations helps me to understand the passage well. So read the Prodigal Son story in these different translations, because as you do that, as you read it in different translations, you're able to have a much bigger picture of the story. You're able to read it and reread it to really know the passage. Remember, if we read the Bible to understand, to share, and to change, we need to know the passage. Take time today to really know the passage and share it with others. What are the differences in the translations that you saw? Anyway, have a wonderful time studying God's Word today, meditating on His Word. Remember to keep on loving God, loving others, and loving His Word. Have a wonderful day. God bless you. Love you guys. Bye.